Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. Welcome to Jewish London's event where we're proud to welcome Amara Pope. Amara is a PhD candidate at Western University in Media Studies, and she explores the intersections of promotional culture and popular music. As a TEDx speaker with over 3 years of working experience in branding and marketing, Ms. Pope has published academic papers about the pop artist Drake's marketing and branding strategies. Ms. Pope has completed her master's degree at Wilfrid Laurier University in Communication Studies and has a joint honors bachelor's degree at the University of Waterloo in Rhetoric and Professional Writing and in Fine Arts with a digital media specialization. So we are in very good hands. Thank you, Amara, for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say about Drake and the complicated world in which we live. Thank you, Amara.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. So I will be sharing with you today my insights regarding how ideologies of Canadian identities have influenced popular music branding and content creation. So by ideologies, I mean what types of ideas, values, and beliefs construct what Canada represents in the discourse of Canadian popular music. More specifically, I wish to explore with you how popular Canadian artist Drake embodies Canadian values through his performance of race, religion, class, and national identity. I personally was a fan of Drake, rooting him on with Canadian pride when I saw a Canadian artist gaining international recognition across broadcast and digital media. So when musical artist Drake piqued my interest, I began exploring how Drake branded himself using ideologies of Canada and Canadianness to an international audience. And I examined how Drake attempted to appeal to a more universal demographic through marketing and branding strategies. I noticed that Drake alludes to different cultures, locations, and social identities in different music videos to construct his place as a rapper in the music industry. In music videos, Drake represents different identities of being biracial, black and white, Jewish, Canadian, and American. So when comparing and contrasting music videos and looking at Drake's affiliation to different identities in different cultural groups, I'm arguing that Drake's performance of identity becomes both critical and reflective of Canada's national narrative of multiculturalism and diversity. Multiculturalism is criticized as being overly optimistic by celebrating diverse identities in Canada. Multiculturalism recognizes and celebrates different cultural groups that make up Canada's mosaic of identities and people, without often addressing the hierarchical system of preferring certain languages, practices, and behaviors in Canada's public space over others. For example, Canada prides itself in allowing people to follow their own traditions and religions at home, but while in public, they must conform to English British languages and cultural practices. So reminiscent of the reinvigoration of Black Lives Matter movements in Canada and America in 2020, in 2011, Drake actually contributes to the ideology of Canada as being a more tolerant space than its neighboring countries. So Drake in 2011 states that, quote, Canada is like a cultural melting pot, especially Toronto. We have cultural areas, Little India, Chinatown, but it's not segregated, end quote. So here Drake highlights a common national narrative of Canada that's constructed through differences to our neighboring country of America. By comparing Canada to America, the cultural imaginary of Canada becomes tied to what it is not and what it has in comparison to America. And through such comparisons, Canada is seen as more tolerant. However, in 2020, according to Tony Master T. Young, quote, Canada is just actually embracing that there is racism in this country, end quote. So we are seeing a lot more conversations about racism and infrastructural oppression in Canada. And Drake contributes to these conversations through lyrical wordplay in which he discusses these struggles. In Drake's song, Deep Pockets, released in April of 2020 amidst the Black Lives Matter movement, his lyric states that his, quote, soundtrack is ease and tensions, keeping family at a East attention, and out of Pine Hill Funeral Center, spots we got no business entering, and claims to have an Afrocentric eye, end quote. So immediately he declares his race in the lyrics of the song as Afrocentric, at a time of high political tensions over Black rights. So here he aligns himself with the movement. In different songs, Drake conveys different aspects of his identity, speaking Spanish on some tracks and Arabic in others, representing Caribbean influences in some music videos and Jewish affiliations in others. As Drake celebrates these different identities in different music videos, he is sometimes challenged for pandering different cultural identities, while also addressing the complexities of identifying with many different identities at the same time. So in many ways, Drake embodies the cultural imaginary of Canada's multiculturalism. But Canada's multiculturalism as a practice and policy is a fairly new concept from the 1970s, as previous Canadian narratives included other ideologies, such as Canada being the Great White North filled with stereotypes, such as being populated with mostly white people who eat maple syrup and love to play hockey. But ideologies and national imaginaries change over time, and the conceptualization of Canada has been shifting to that of a multicultural mosaic. So I assess how Drake capitalizes on these shared experiences of different cultural, national, and class identities reflective of multicultural ideologies by affiliating himself with different identities, including Judaism. So Drake is biracial with a white mother and a Black father, binational with a Canadian and American citizenship. Grew up in a religious home of both Jewish and Catholic influences. And in terms of his class statuses, Drake claims to have started from the bottom as a low-class member of society, while also depicting his lifestyle today, celebrating his accumulated wealth as a high-class rapper. Drake, based on his race, class, and religious affiliations, creates narratives that allow him to identify with a range of different marginalized identities. When Drake claims the complexities of his identities, he's actually at the same time leveraging an intersectional identity. And by intersectional identity, I refer to the different identities that Drake holds and performs in society, based on his economic, racial, social, and political statuses. And I look at how these different statuses interact, how Drake becomes both a hip hop artist and as a Jewish person, and look at the ways in which those two identities kind of change the way he brands himself within and outside of music. So how does Drake showcase these multiple identities while negotiating differences in the stereotypes of the identities and communities he represents? So as I just mentioned, an ideology is a set of customs, values, and beliefs. And much like the ideology of Canada or a Canadian identity, we can see the ideological framework applied to religion with a set of customs, values, and beliefs. Ideologies are not fixed, and religion is not static. Religion doesn't start and end with the sacred stories of beginnings. And according to Ludwig in 2006, quote, each religion is a living organism that changes and develops in new situations and experiences, end quote. So understanding the dynamism of religion and any ideology is important in understanding and analyzing how religion and culture are practiced today in new and different ways. So examine how Drake performs Jewish practices in ways that may shape and influence conceptualizations of Judaism today. I will begin by analyzing Drake's relationship to Judaism and examine how he establishes and occupies a particular space in Jewish culture. His religious affiliations stem from being raised by his mother in Forest Hill, a heavily populated Jewish neighborhood in Toronto. During his youth, Drake attended a Jewish day school and was even bar mitzvahed. Drake sings about being Jewish and performs traditions related to Judaism in the public eye, which allows him to connect with fans who find these articulations, actions, and words familiar. The artist also works to increase the visibility of Judaism and Jewish traditions. Many people may perceive the way the artist performs these traditional or religious practices as blasphemy, disrespectful, or even ignorant. But I argue that this may oversimplify or reduce the complex role that artists play, who embody many types of negotiations of identity, where Drake represents different cultural influences in very different contexts. Drake embodies many types of negotiations which take place as different ideologies and value systems clash. For example, how does Drake being a hip hop star affect the ways he represents his Jewish affiliations? By taking part in the discourse of identity performance, I'm examining the objectification of bodies in media. I recognize the power that musical artists hold in performing intersectional identities in music videos across media texts. And I'm critically analyzing what the implications are of commodifying and capitalizing on these different cultural, national, and racial identities. I'm attending to a particular type of work that musical artists do in mapping histories, identities, and experiences of marginalized groups to a global audience. And I complicate the ways in which Drake leverages these different identities. So Drake, in the music video, HYFR, attempts to reconnect with his Jewish culture and adult life. He has stated that his first bar mitzvah was actually held in the basement of a Chinese restaurant because that's all his mother could afford. And in 2012, Drake told Cash Money videographer Derek G on MTV that, quote, if he ever got rich, he'd throw himself a re-bar mitzvah. And that's the concept of this music video, end quote. HYFR, the music video, is heavily steeped in tropes of hip hop culture. In my published paper from 2016, I stated that the music video, quote, romanticizes a world of access and alcohol, drugs, end quote. Drake's video includes hip hop genre tropes by drinking and dancing wildly with fellow rappers who are wearing masks and streetwear, which are juxtaposed by the props and the settings that Drake uses in the video to relate to Judaism. In my publication, I further state that, quote, the clip aligns Drake with a coming of age event that includes the Jewish religion. Conversely, at 15 seconds in the video, present-day Drake is seen as standing outside an enormous Miami synagogue with his entourage, immediately showcasing his wealth while creating religious affiliations to Judaism, end quote. In the music video, Drake is presented in front of a cake shaped like a Torah that says Happy Bar Mitzvah. Drake grabs the scrolls of the Torah cake and performs the synagogue ritual of lifting the Torah after it is read. A ritual guide points out to the place to read, and Drake takes his prayer shawl fringes, respectfully kisses the Torah, and chants. These practices emphasize Drake's knowledge of the Jewish culture and illustrate him actually partaking in these traditions, which creates a sense of ethos and believability as a Black Jewish hip hop artist. In HYFR, Drake even includes a home video of himself as a child dancing at his cousin's bar mitzvah. A Caucasian relative bends down and asks young Drake if he had anything to say to the camera, and Drake yells, Mazel tov. In the home video, it's important in constructing Drake's believability as a Jewish person, because the home video gives us the audience a sense of who Drake is as Aubrey Graham, the off-screen person, what he was like as a child. As Marwick and Boyd stated in 2011, giving, quote, the illusion of the backstage gives the impression of uncensored glimpses, end quote, to create a type of transparency pertaining to who Drake is and his beliefs and values. Here, Drake blends his on-screen persona as an artist with his off-screen private beliefs to create a sense of legitimacy in speaking to and on behalf of Jewish culture. By directly associating himself with Jewish traditions through his music videos, lyrics, and interviews, Drake is able to narrate his struggles as a Black Jewish man and discuss aspects of his Jewish culture. In an interview with CBS in 2011, Drake stated that he was raised in a Jewish household, but he always felt like an outsider. In his community, he was teased as being biracial at a Jewish school. And in 2013, Drake discusses the same experiences in Vibe magazine about not fitting in Forest Hill. He stated that, quote, the racism he experienced is because he was Jewish. And he went on to explain that, quote, Jewish kids didn't understand how he could be both Black and Jewish, end quote. Hence, Drake is made aware of the color of his skin at a very early age. And as a child, he attempted to rationalize these differences, as his body was marked as different and misaligned with dominant beliefs of what a Jewish person looked like as a biracial person. Additionally, on a skit in SNL in 2016, Drake stated that he was a Black Canadian, to which his co-star immediately rebuttals that he didn't know Black Canadians existed. And Drake, as a biracial Black and white Canadian, also challenges dominant beliefs of what Canadians look like. In his song You and the Six from 2015, Drake reflects on being teased for being Black, yet not Black enough as a Western rapper within the Jewish community. As a biracial member of society, Drake is immediately placed in a historical trajectory of immigration and a settler colonial context being half Black, and positioned to a particular place in the cultural imaginary as being half white. As a public figure, Drake is immediately positioned against other Jewish people, other Canadians, and other hip hop artists. To understand Drake's promotional styles of his identities, including his Canadianisms or affiliations to Judaism, it's important to be critical about his position in popular culture. All musical artists are constructed to a degree. To explain a musical artist persona, I draw on a theory coined by Richard Dyer called a star image, which refers to a person's on-screen personality that's not only believable through glimpses of their off-screen lives, but Dyer even states that a star image is not a real person, that it's constructed, as any other aspect of fiction is, out of a range of materials, including advertising, magazines, as well as films, to which I add, in the modern day, music videos, and social media posts. A star image is a carefully constructed persona that relies on both the artist's performed person on camera and the offline media texts that uphold the authenticity and the believability of their on-screen lives. Drake, as most musical artists today, use interviews and online communication to explain, elaborate on, and legitimize their on-screen presence, their physical appearance, and address the experiences and the emotions discussed in their lyrics. By strategically regulating knowledge about Drake, the on-screen personality of the musical artist becomes more believable, and it connects them to their off-screen lives. So what's believed to be the artist's authentic self, their real-life experiences, are publicized and depicted a certain way to make the artist and their music more believable and more authentic. His religious affiliations become part of his star image and become an aspect of who Drake is as the person of Aubrey Graham offstage. In today's postmodern world, we're seeing a surge of ideologies that promote more fluid thinking. For example, gender is challenged as non-binary, as a spectrum, and race as a series of classification systems that are complex and unfixed. So through these theories of postmodern identity, Drake associates himself with Judaism in certain instances across media texts and challenges the rigid stereotypes of his race, gendered, and cultural identities. Drake does not follow the trend of the hegemonic image of a Western hip-hop megastar by singing as a heartbroken player and an emotional rapper, and he often challenged as being inauthentic. Similarly, Drake doesn't follow the hegemonic image of a Jewish person. As a biracial member of society and as a rapper, he is challenged for misrepresenting or being uneducated about the Jewish culture. Drake doesn't fit the stereotypical image of a Canadian identity of the Great White North as a biracial and Jewish member of society. So all of these different identities are put in dialogue with one another in the construction of a star image. Drake is challenged as appearing inauthentic in both the hip hop and the Jewish community. But Drake publicly associates himself with religion and culture of Judaism through multiple media and increases the authenticity and believability. Lyrics, interviews, and different forms of online communication become effective tools to mold and strengthen his star image and situate artists like Drake in the particular cultural groups. So artists are strong influencers and educators of cultural traditions due to their ability to disseminate information at a fast and wide reach, especially today in the digital age. With social media, artists have increased their potential connectivity with audiences at seemingly 24/7 rates. Artists increasingly blend their on-screen public personas and their off-screen private lives in live streams, especially during COVID-19, when all in-person events are canceled. Therefore, artists are pulled into the public eye and their private lives are pushed into public discourses. With increasing number of media texts, including social media posts, stories, and live streams, audiences are encouraged to piece together a lifestyle of how the artist lives their life and what beliefs and values that the artist holds. Drake continually connects his music, his persona, and his appearances with the Jewish cultures and traditions. He draws on tropes and styles of different media to integrate Jewish identities in different forms through different practices. By continually referencing Canadian culture and a Jewish identity through multiple media, he brings Judaism and Canadianism into different conversations across platforms in popular culture. Musical artists shape culture and come to represent more than just themselves. They are symbolic of different locations, languages, and behavioral norms of particular communities. Artists are important sites to study changes in culture and religion. The social role of artists is important as it performs across many different media and fundamentally attends to the ways in which artists build and maintain their fan base and star status. A Jewish identity becomes a source of pride and a tool to construct Drake's image, and religious affiliations allow artists to demonstrate their personal beliefs to consumers. Mac Miller, for example, has been another artist who affiliates himself with Judaism. And Miller's lyrics for Kicking Incredibly Dope Shit in 2010, he states, "Letters of my soul, scriptures from my Torah." These lyrics would have less relevance and be less believable if Mac Miller was not perceived as authentically Jewish. But Aubrey Graham declaring himself as Jewish, Drake's on-screen persona is able to commodify particular content related to Jewish culture. So social media becomes an important instrument for artists to convey their star images and tell stories about who they are and what beliefs they hold. The importance of the oral tradition and narration is shared between popular music and religious practices of Judaism. One major goal of storytelling within the Jewish tradition is to elevate faith, to inspire people to improve their actions and teach people about ethical understandings. Stories have been powerful, motivational, inspirational, and educational tools to tell the happenings of Jewish people. Both within hip hop and the Jewish tradition, stories have been used to describe the hardships, the histories of individuals and groups of people. Music with an element of storytelling has become an effective vehicle to educate the masses about Jewish traditions, culture, and Canadian identities. Hip hop and popular music become romanticized biographies of the artists, which allow artists to describe their experiences, represent who they are, and teach us about what they believe. Academics and commercial media alike constantly interrogate levels of authenticity within hip hop music and follow the construction of musical artist star images. Storytelling has helped blur the lines between the off-screen and on-screen persona of musical artists to allow artists to narrate their experiences across different media. Pop songs are often constructed like a conversation between a singer and an audience. And Auslander in 2015 identifies how music allows a singer to use, quote, direct address and planned informality to create an effect of intimacy with the listener, end quote. Lyrics, interviews, and performances also allow the social actor to elaborate on their own values and histories from a first-person perspective. With the rise of social media, a tweet shared through the artist's personal account seemingly allows the artist to be both the narrator and the subject of the story. Current literature explores the credibility and how it is established and displayed in the industry by drawing on regionalism, personal history, race, religion, and commercialism. To conclude, I would like to convey that popular music acts as a social function. According to Reisman in 1950, he stated that, quote, music gives you something to talk or kid about with friends, end quote. And I actually extend this argument from the 1950s to suggest that music continues to play a social function. But in the digital age, music more actively connects fans to fans on network platforms and creates a shared sense of community. The affordances of digital media give audiences more agency and more opportunities to stream songs more easily, to discuss their thoughts in public forums, to share their music with friends and family, and to connect and follow artists more frequently through Instagram posts, Facebook stories, tweets, and YouTube videos, all of which change the relationship between the artist and the audience. I acknowledge the ways in which digital media creates audio-visual windows of experiencing the world, of consuming other people's viewpoints, and creating imagined communities and ideologies of people, places, religions, and events. Ideologies of Canada can be constructed through popular music artists. Representations of Canada through their music and social media posts, in-person events, and other media texts can help artists curate understandings of Canada and Judaism, our knowledge of citizenship, of race, or any other ideology. Popular music as a space is becoming more diversified and interwoven with Jewish cultures and traditions. Genres and religions and ideologies of race, class, and national identities continue to open up to include new practices, new styles, and more diverse people in the public eye that challenge traditional norms. So I leave you with two questions. One, how do your favorite popular artists represent Canada, race, and religion? And two, how do these representations compare to your understandings of ideologies today? And that's it. And so I think we have time for a few questions.
Thank you so much, Amara. We really appreciated that insight. That was tremendous and so provocative. And I see that Donna Kleiman has a question for you.
Surprise, surprise. Amara, that presentation was so packed with information, and especially since I'm not of the hip hop generation, I tried to absorb what you were talking about. You'll forgive me if I thought Drake was a Toronto Raptor. Do you follow basketball?
Yes, I do. He's their ambassador. So it's not too far off. You're on the right track.
I thought that was very good. Yes, so the music, of course, that I grew up with was so different than this kind of music, that it's interesting the way that you brought out this different dimension of how he represents the different parts of his personality. The phrase "the Great White North" I think originated more from the snow. Like I could be corrected, but it seems to me that the Great White North is an old expression that originally I thought meant, from ice and snow and so on. So it's obviously getting a different connotation today. But anyway, I thought it was superb and packed with information. And thank you for sharing it with us.
Well, happy to be here, and I'm glad you took something away from it. And again, you weren't too far off. Drake is still part of the Raptors, so you're fine.
Eric, I'd ask a question.
Sure, please go ahead.
Go ahead, yeah.
It's Monda.
Hi.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your talk.
No, thank you.
I was just wondering, how do you distinguish, in terms of Drake, how do you distinguish between Drake being this sort of fluid person who represents intersectionality,
Mhm.
and him with all of these identities, perhaps appropriating and commodifying identities for his own satisfaction or his own profit, or for whatever reason you might think of?
Right. And so I found an interview with him not too long ago where he was stating that he didn't consider it appropriation if he was doing his due diligence and offering respect or giving props, as they would say in the hip hop culture, to the culture he was trying to participate in. And appropriation is such a fine line to walk, because in some ways people can say that he's tangentially trying to incorporate himself in these different communities. But then again, on the other hand, you have the argument that if he grew up in these certain cultures or religions or had these influences, how can you then state that he's appropriating it? So it's a tension. Even right now in the hip hop space, Justin Bieber is trying to participate in the R&B culture, but it's known to be traditionally American Black culture. So how can this guy from small town Ontario who is Caucasian participate in the space? So music, I think, is a great way to explore culture and explore how people are trying to interpret these different practices and religions and represent them, because it's just such a fluid space and it can be interpreted in so many different ways.
But do you necessarily believe Drake? Like as you're writing your thesis, do you necessarily believe what he says about his own identity, or do you have to examine that with some skepticism? I mean, can you ever believe somebody about their own identity, or do you make that the primary viewpoint, that one's own perception of one's identity is the one that we should take to heart more than anything else?
Yeah, and that's the whole argument with the star image, is that you can never really know for sure who these people are, but the more media text, now that they have social media, the more actively they're trying to showcase a certain aspect of themselves. They can curate that image so much more easily. They can take a Snapchat story at home, and that can reiterate their cultural influences. So it's becoming harder and harder to decide whether or not it's a performance. But again, it's always going to be a performance. It's always going to be articulated and molded a certain way. So as an academic, I always have to wear the critical hat of saying, how does he represent it, and what media text is he using, and how is that reinforced over time or over different mediums?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Amara, may I weigh in with a question
Yes.
myself? As American, always these topics that have this distinctly Canadian feel, provoke me a bit, and I wonder, and kind of looking at it for the long view, the historical view of, American songwriters, American Jewish songwriters have so often denied or hid their Jewish aspect, whether you're talking about White Christmas or songs like that. Mm-hmm. And then you have this Canadian trajectory, maybe with Leonard Cohen and now with Drake, where they, embrace it, use it as pivotal points in their careers and in their music. Is there anything to say to that or speak to that?
Well, I do think that by participating again in a traditionally Black culture, American style of music, hip hop culture, R&B music, they kind of had to hone in on their upbringing and their influences, because they can't claim that same street cred that other artists had claimed in the space. So they almost had to reinforce it and make it the forefront to be authentic and to curate it in a way that they can use to their advantage. So I think that's why Drake is trying to showcase all these different aspects of his identity and claiming that Canadianness, because he had to use it as a strength in the hip hop space rather than a weakness.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi, Eric. I have a question. It's Sonia.
Hi, Sonia.
How are you? Thank you so much for your talk, Amara. I have a question. I granted, I'm not overly familiar with Drake because I'm, a little older than you. But when I have watched some of his videos, granted not from beginning to end usually, I'm really struck that many of his videos are still quite sexist. And so I'm wondering how all of this fluidity, all of this cultural fluidity, what kind of role it plays when, and how sincere it is when you compare it to such rigid gender divisions he has, in terms of the male-female role in videos, the stereotypes, the sexism. I mean, he's playing the quintessential male role and fulfilling some very undesirable stereotypes of a Black man and of a man generally. So how does all of that fit into all of this, tolerance of different cultures and all of this embracing of different cultures?
So again, when I mentioned that he also doesn't fit the stereotypes of a hegemonic hip hop artist, he's trying to play off as a heartbroken player. So by trying to do that kind of crooning, that sentimental, soulful music juxtaposed with these hardcore rap songs, he's trying to play the lines of both. And again, this could go along with the idea of appropriation, how he can play to all these different cultures and pander to these different cultures. He's kind of doing the same in the sense of saying, I respect women, but I also create these music videos. So he's continually playing with these blurred lines in his career.
I guess that's what I find difficult to, embrace about him is what you just said. I mean, I admire his attempt to embrace all of these, but when you kind of contextualize it as playing his viewers and his audience, that's what kind of, irritates me a little bit about him, to be truthful.
I guess to put a sharper point on it, if I may jump in, I mean, there's the issue of his authenticity or honesty that we're all wrestling with, and it's challenged with this superstar persona, definition that you brought forward that leaves space for this kind of amorphous identity. But is there any room for judgment or morality? Is it there? I mean, is he better or worse than others? There's the private life of various artists that get publicized, and some of them do great works charitably speaking. Others, are committing criminal acts that and become infamous for those acts. Others, do criminal acts and seem to be financially rewarded for that. So where does ethics come into this conversation?
I think again, it's just up to the individual. Some people, like certain artists, some don't. I mean, and you have to remember that he is also playing in the context of hip hop music. There are dominant tropes to participate in that space, to be authentic, to gain credibility. So he's also walking that line between all these different identities, being a Canadian and also being in the hip hop world. So again, it might not be everybody's cup of tea, but it's a preference based on genre, style, and the individual artist.
No, it's been fascinating hearing, all the different aspects, and there's the commercial aspects, the cultural aspects, and and all the different intersections that you mentioned, and we really appreciate it. On behalf of Jewish London, I want to thank you for taking the time to kind of craft and hone your arguments, specifically for the audience that we're able to bring to you. And I think we all found it very meaningful and thought-provoking. And it's just been tremendous. It's been great working with you. You've been so generous towards us, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you for having
Amara.
me.
Thank you,
Thank you
Amara.
for having
Much,
me.
Amara. It was
That was
great.
excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Amara. Good
No
luck.
problem.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, Joe.